Dr. Alexandar Darku is an assistant professor of economics at the University of Lethbridge. Prior to his present position, Dr. Darku taught at McGill University and Concordia University. He teaches and researches in the fields of economic development, international economics, and monetary economics. Dr. Darku holds a PhD in economics with specialization in economic development and international trade and finance from McGill University. He also holds a master's degree in economic policy management from McGill University and Master of Philosophy and BA honors degrees in economics from the University of Ghana. In addition to his 12 years teaching experience, Dr. Darku has served as a consultant to the World Bank in Washington, D.C. between 1998 and 2002. He also has spent 2 years between 1995 and 1997 working with PricewaterhouseCoopers in Accra, Ghana, as an economist. Dr. Darku has two main lines of research. The first focuses on how international trade leads to growth and the distribution of income, especially in developing countries. The second line of research focuses on the relationship between business cycles, poverty, and income inequality. Most recently, Dr. Darku collaborated in the editing of the book, The Policymaking Process in Ghana, How Politicians and Civil Servants Deal with Public Problems. In addition to numerous articles in international peer-reviewed journals and background papers to policy documents at the World Bank, Dr. Darku is the author of empirical essays in open economy macroeconomics and a policy regime analysis of monetary policy rules and the determination of the current account in small open economies. This book is published in 2008, and he is also the author of or the editor of the Balance of Payment Analysis of Developing Economies, Evidence from Nigeria and Ghana, and this book was published in 2005. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Alexandar Darku.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick note, I would suggest to keep the questions until the end. And one more note here, I will circulate a sheet of paper so we can put your information and your email address if you're new to the Prentice Institute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pascal. Pascal shared office next to my office, and I have never ever felt that he loved me that much until today. So thanks for the love. I'll begin today's presentation with special thanks to two ladies sitting in this room. Probably they don't know why I'm going to mention them. The first is Susan McDaniel, our own director. And the reason why I'm thanking her for this presentation is that she unknowingly is the originator of this research that I did. I remember one day I came to my office in the morning, and as usual, probably during her morning reading, she does a lot of reading in the mornings, she probably came across some article. She fired it to me very early in the morning. I was rushing for class, but then I was very curious, and I downloaded it and read introduction and conclusion, and this was an interesting discussion on the possible link between income inequality and the decline of savings patterns in the United States, and how that could be one of the reasons why the United States is in its current financial crisis. So the moment I came back after my class, I paid particular attention to it, and I said, I will do this for Canada. And I will try and do it even much better than this guy did. So thank you. Thank you very much for finding me in a time that I seem to be lost in research topics, finding me one great research topic. And the second person is Adriana Apawo. She is my graduate student, and she did fantastic work in assisting me, because I had to do this in 3 months, this paper. and I needed able assistance. So she did a fantastic job at the literature collection stage, literature review, data collection, and even the econometrics that we are going to talk about today. She did a fantastic job, and thank you so much for your help. Today's topic, as Pascal said, is simply income inequality, status seeking, and savings rates in Canada. And the outline is as simply, generally, I will start with the introduction and talk about objectives, related literature, empirical facts, some kind of empirical facts, theoretical and the model specifications that I used for the study, discuss the results, and conclude and at least do my best to offer some policy implications coming from the results of the study. Introduction. Basically, in economics, as we teach our intro classes, we give them a very simple, basic savings function. And economists have always used this savings function, but it's becoming increasingly known that the standard savings function does not seem to capture all the important variables that can be used to predict why, especially, savings can decline in periods of economic growth. Because the basic standard savings function says as income increases, savings will increase because we have a constant savings rate. And hence, this will not be able to explain the situation in United States and, like I said, also in Canada as we see now. Also, according to Statistics Canada, personal savings rates in Canada has declined from double digits to single digits over the past 2 decades. And even in some provinces, the savings rates have become negative. Within the same period, too, we have seen some growth. This simply implies that consumption expenditure has grown rapidly over the same period. And also, this is quite problematic. Why? Because on the macroeconomic level, falling savings rates means too little investment, unless we borrow from abroad, low economic growth, and a poor external performance. And as we have seen this in somewhere in Europe, particularly Greece and also our southern neighbors, United States. On the microeconomic level, Bryant 2001 has also showed that low and declining savings rate threatens future financial distress for many households. So it is really very important for us to determine or to investigate what is the underlying causes of this declining savings rate and what can policy do to reverse it. So the objective of today's presentation is simply to examine in a much more comprehensive manner, going behind the standard savings function, the relationship that probably may exist between income inequality, consumption, and savings. And I will specifically try to see the mechanism or investigate the mechanism through which dynamics in income inequality in Canada may contribute to consumption and savings decision of Canadians. In other words, I want to see the possible role that other social factors, which is not the standard economic factors that determine savings rate, may play in the relationship between income inequality and savings rate in Canada, which standard theoretical work and even some empirical work of consumption and savings have not been able to include. Or in other words, they have abstract from this social determinant. And what seemed to bother me about this is that even in the basic demand that we teach our students at the basic level 1010 or 1012, we try to show them that besides pure economic factors determining demand for anything in the economy, there are some social and environmental factors. And quite simple, the kind of the factors that would drive demand for umbrellas in, let's say, Vancouver and Seattle will be way different from the factors that determine the demand for umbrellas in Lethbridge or Calgary, okay? So definitely environmental factors and other social factors are very important in determining some important economic variables. And that is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to see if those factors can explain some of the anomalies that we see in the relationship between income and savings in Canada. Weissman 2009 argues, and these are some of the people who have tried to take a look into the role these social and cultural factors play in the savings. And he argues that it is important to incorporate human generic heritage and cultural conditioning into preference functions in order to capture the complete set of variables that impact on our choices. And choices could be demand, spending, and those kind of things. Again, this argument, if you may, is consistent or is in line with the very first economists who introduced this kind of social behavior into consumption function, and that is James Dusenberry in 1949. And his view is simply that real understanding of the problem of consumption behavior must begin with a full recognition of the social character of consumption patterns. And like I said, largely in economic analysis, we have been ignoring these important determinants of our consumption patterns. This argument is also consistent with Bosworth, 1993, who claimed that differences in cultures may be important in explaining savings behaviors because international differences in savings rates are not well explained by traditional economic variables. Okay? So with these three claims, I take on the challenge to see for Canada if I could see any significant relationship between other non-economic, social, and cultural factors determining savings, and hence throw this into the general debate on what can be done to reverse the decline in savings rate in Canada. The literature on this kind of relationship began with the early consumption functions by Fisher and Keynes, who discussed, they discussed at the general level the relationship between savings, wealth, and economic growth. But specifically, Keynes is the one who hinted some kind of relationship between income inequality. And in his idea, he said that income inequality will slow down economic growth because the marginal consumption decreases as the income of an individual increases. The marginal consumption decreases as the income of an individual decreases, meaning there seems to be some relationship between income inequality and consumption behavior in the economy. But it is James Dusenberry, like I said earlier, who explicitly tried to discuss the relationship between savings and income distribution in 1949. But a few years after, it was not supposed to live its glory. A few years after, there were a lot of developments in the consumption behavior, particularly the groundbreaking ones by Friedman and Modigliani and then also Modigliani and Bloomberg, that seemed to provide a new theoretical framework on the relation between income distribution and savings. And that is that, according to their model, poor and rich households spend a constant proportion of their permanent income. And hence, savings rates remain stable over time and are independent of households' income distribution. So though James Dusenberry hinted kind of a social relationship between social and cultural factors and savings, these people just throw it out of the window and say that savings rate will be constant because of the idea of permanent income hypothesis. And for that matter, people stopped looking at the possibility of James Dusenberry's claim. And hence, many decades, even up to today, all consumption functions, all research based on consumption functions have used the permanent income hypothesis. What I'm doing today is that have we been ignoring other important variables that can explain consumption by simply switching our attention from what he hinted in 49 and the groundbreaking work of Friedman and Modigliani and the others. But there have been a lot of other empirical studies that have used this permanent income hypothesis and have been concluding in very different ways without paying any particular attention to the variables that I think are very important. And right after that, I can categorize some of the further theoretical and empirical work on savings, and possibly savings and its relationship with income inequality, into 3 different categories. First is the neoclassical literature, which began with the seminal work of Cardor and Passaniti, which later became known as the Cardor-Passaniti channel. And they basically conclude, theoretically and empirically, conclude that there is a positive relationship between income inequality and savings rate. So when there is unequal distribution of income, savings would increase. Why? This is based on like the Keynesian idea. It's consistent with what Keynes did. Why? Because the rich have higher marginal rate of savings. And hence, if income distribution is skewed in favor of few rich people, savings would increase, and we wouldn't have any problems with any possible negative relationship between the two. The next set of literature is the political economy literature, which also led by Edward and Dumbush, Alexandar Roderick in '96, and a few others, and they seem to show that there is an indirect negative link from increased income inequality through socio-political instability and low investment growth to low aggregate savings. So they are the first to do this kind of theoretical and empirical work to show that there could possibly be a negative relationship between income inequality and aggregate savings in the economy. But this literature is quite new. As I said earlier on, Bosworth and Weissman have hinted from the quote that I just gave you earlier on that we should be able to incorporate some cultural and social conditions in our saving function to see if we are missing some important things. But they did not go on to do any empirical work because it's just from observation, observing that the standard economic variables have not done well in explaining saving functions either within a country or across countries or within a study of many countries. But it is only these 2 so far. I mean, there may be more, but it's only these 2 that are very significant to today's discussion, these 2 literatures. That is Jean and others, 2011, and Robert and others, 2010. These 2 have proposed and empirically tested the effect of social and cultural factors on savings decisions and have found, like you see there, mixed result. The Jean et al. Study is also based on social status seeking in the economy. But with them, they postulate that because people want to signal their wealth, then they would try to save more today, meaning postponing consumption today, accumulate more wealth so that they can signal their wealth going forward. Okay? They want to be wealthy, they want to follow people who are richer than them, and the only way they can do would be to postpone consumption today and save more in the future. Hence, they find positive relationship between income inequality and savings through social status seeking. The second one, the same through social status seeking, postulates a strict negative relationship between income inequality and savings. And that is simply from the theory, which I would explain further because I would adapt the Robert et al. Model. And in their model, because like I said, from observation, in Canada we have seen that income inequality has been worsening over time and savings rate has been decreasing over time. So if I want to empirically test, I think the Robert et al. Theory might be what I would use, and that is exactly what I use. But I will preview to some extent. They say that because of social status seeking, when income inequality worsens and the rich signal their wealth by consuming more, because of the general thing, they follow the Joneses hypothesis, okay? The next people in the income ladder would also want to signal their wealth by spending more. Okay? And then this will have some kind of ratchet effect. And then the next in the income ladder would also want to copy the next. And this will lead to a situation that they call expenditure cascade, where an increase in income inequality will trigger an expenditure cascade where almost everybody will be saving, will be consuming more than before, and for that matter, would end up saving less. Hence, there is a negative relationship between income inequality and savings rates. Some empirical fact, I'm going to try to show why it's really very important. After I read this fact, why, together with a paper that Susan sent me, why I decided to do this study. First, during the period of 1941 to 1971, the Canadian economy experienced dramatic technological progress and social changes that led to a highly urbanized and industrialized society. So industrialization continued deepening, and throughout the period, aggregate income shares remained stable. So there was not that problem with income inequality, okay? And why? Because the same era witnessed the adherence of the Keynesian full employment macroeconomic and welfare state social policies that assured that capitalists earned increasing dividends, but at the same time, workers also got rising wages. And most of you would, appreciate the Keynesian revolution during the Great Depression, and then, for that matter, the kind of policy prescriptions, more large government should help people, and those kind of things, for mostly for macroeconomic stabilization, but also would call for some kind of income distribution effect. So that era witnessed that, and then we saw stable income shares in Canada. However, the stagflation that we experienced in the early 70s, and stagflation, I will take my time to explain, very simple, the situation where the economy could be declining, increasing unemployment, and yet inflation will be increasing. Because the Keynesian idea is more of the demand side ideas of the economy. They didn't pay any much attention to the supply side. And when there was this kind of supply side shocks, it led to a situation where the world got a double evil, where there was increasing unemployment and also inflation was increasing. So that led to what we call in economics the neoclassical counter-revolution, coming back to say, you government, you did it all wrong over the past 3 decades. You follow Keynesian's idea, crazy ideas. This is what you get when you follow that. Come back home to the classical thinking. We will chatter you through the path of wealth creation. So definitely the stagflation experience marked the beginning of the shift from the Keynesian macroeconomic accommodations with welfare state policies to the neoclassical capitalist conditions and limited social policies. Limited social policies. Because of that, during the 80s and the 70s, the era of the stable income that we saw in the 40s to 70s changed drastically, and Canada, like most of other industrialized nations, faced two significant recessions, post-Great Recessions, and that hurt the economy so severely. So what happened is that Canadian social policies witnessed a long series of cutbacks. And during the same period and beyond, growth in wages slowed, whilst economic growth continued. So who got economic growth? The rich. Right? So the benefit of economic growth had mostly gone to the people at the top of the income groups, and income inequality simply increased. And during the same period, personal savings rate trended downwards. So with this empirical fact, and I have some. Did I go too far? Yeah. And I have some fact to show. This is the distribution of income in 76 and up to 2010. And you can see that in 76, about 4.9% of income accrued or was commanded by the lowest 20% of the income quintile, right? And the highest income quintile commanded woeful 41% of income. But if you look across the decades, you will see that as the low income earners, marginally shrunk, middle income went down a lot, but the high income earners started gaining grounds and gaining more and more shares of income in Canada. And if you look at it graphically, you could see, marginally, you could see that not so high, but this is Gini coefficient, okay? Gini coefficient hasn't increased significantly. Even with a lower increase in Gini coefficient, it translates into a very high increase in income inequality, okay? So that is the Gini coefficient, which trended upwards over the period. And then the personal savings rate in Canada also trended downwards. So having seen this, and also going deeper into this by looking at the provincial dimension of the fact, I decided to do this study. And you could see that, for instance, in the 70s, mid-70s, if you look at the 70s number, you could see that Newfoundland was, so to speak, the most equitable province in the country, okay? And going through the decades, when you look at it, it became the 7th equitable province over the period. So income inequality really worsened for Newfoundland. And then for countries, provinces like BC, though it was relatively high at the beginning of the time, it also ended really very high. So income inequality worsened in BC. It also worsened in Alberta. I think Manitoba and Saskatchewan are the only provinces that seem to have some kind of stable over the period, but there is some mild increase there. But the rest of the provinces, especially Quebec, Ontario, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, saw significant deterioration in income inequality. And this is simply the after-tax Gini coefficient by province. But then I took another look, and this is simply looking at the ratio of income earned by the top 20% divided by, the ratio of income earned by the top 20% and the bottom 20%. And with that too, of course, we can interpret this as simply as the people at the top 20% and 6.57 times that of the people on the bottom 20% of Newfoundland. And you can see too that as we go down the years, it's increased dramatically, meaning income distribution worsened. And then you can see that too with BC, as I said. And the story here basically reflects the story on the Gini coefficient, after-tax Gini coefficient. So no matter how you look at, or no matter how you measure income inequality seems to tell the same story for the provinces with some few differences. Okay. However, over the period, this is what happened to savings rates province by province. And you could see in BC where inequality worsened dramatically. It's also the province that since in the middle 1990s, right, savings rates have been in the negative. All right, and there are other provinces that have also seen negative. But the general story is that savings rate, even at the provincial level, have also declined. So the provincial level savings rates have declined for almost every province, and also the national level savings rates have declined. And these have happened within the background of retrogression or deterioration in the income distribution. Okay, and this is why I went to the data with this. So what is the idea about the model that I adopted? Like I said, I adopted the Frank and others expenditure cascade model. And according to the model, as income inequality worsens and the top income earners increases their consumption, they shift the frame of reference that defines consumption standard to the group next to them, who themselves also respond by increasing their consumption, and thereby shifting the frame of reference of that defined consumption standard to the people down there, and this go on to the next group, and this go on, and so on and so forth. So if that is true, according to the theory, then income inequality will lead to people spending too much and, for that matter, saving less. So to show that, they gave a basic consumption function, but before they went there, they showed a basic consumption function that has nothing to do with social status seeking, meaning the baseline model. And in the baseline model, the individual has a simple cobra. I'm going to try to be less technical when it gets to the result and all of the other things. In the baseline model, the individual has the usual Douglas preferences over current consumption and future consumption. And in other words, the individual save this part, this is the savings rate, and this is the income. So save this part of the income, so spend this and save. Hence, this is today's consumption, and that is tomorrow's consumption over time. And hence, if you look at this base consumption function, and you go through utility maximization and differentiate and find everything, this will be equation 2 will be the optimal consumption function. And you see that the optimal consumption function is the basic one that we teach students at the 10-10 level, okay, or 10-12 level, which says that consumption is based on the savings rate. The savings rate here is constant. The savings rate here is constant, kind of mimicking the ideas of the permanent income hypothesis by those guys that we discussed earlier on. However, if we incorporate the idea of status seeking, meaning to make the model reflect the effect of other people's consumption, in other words, incorporating status seeking behavior, the individual an individual is assumed to compare her consumption to a set of consumption levels of neighbors. Okay? So let's assume if N1 represents simply the number of individuals in the set, in whatever reference set that it is, and assume that consuming more than your neighbor makes you happy. Because it is a social seeking culture, right? Consuming more of your neighbor makes an individual happier in the form of gaining more utility, whilst consuming less than the neighbor is a source of worry and results in the loss of utility. This is what they call the consumption cascade. And given the assumption above, it means that the individual's consumption function will now not depend only on the individual's income, but would also depend on how far they are or how other people's consumption differ from their consumption. Okay? And hence the consumption function 3, where the individual's utility function is made up of the basic one that we talked about, and also depend on the difference between neighbor's consumption and his consumption. Sum across the G, okay? The number of people in the references. And this enters the model with a negative. In other words, this parameter measures, this parameter measures the concern that the individual has on the fact that the neighbor's consumption is more. The neighbors seem to enjoy better life than they do. Okay? And hence that utility function. And I'm not going to give you the details, but then if you differentiate that and find the optimal consumption function and solve for the savings function, you would get equation 4. In equation 4, simply say that savings rate for an individual is a function of his own income, and then it's a positive function, right? Because this is negative and this is the denominator. So it's a positive function of his own income, like the basic savings function. And the sum of the savings of neighbors. So my savings depend on my neighbor's savings. Okay? The basic one had nothing to do with it because there was no status-seeking behavior. But if we incorporate this status seeking behavior, then my consumption depends on their consumption. For that matter, my savings rate will depend on their savings. And it looks like a complementary game, those of you who are game theoretic and understand this. So if you consume more, I consume more, you are happy, it makes me want to consume more and be happy, and we are interdependent, okay? And if I went through this mathematically, this will be a very complex game, and try to find a solution where we will get very, very high consumption, very, very low savings rate, and everybody is happy. Individually, but as a group, meaning a nation, we are not happy. Okay? So that is what that means. In other words, this implies that the savings rate of individual I and J are not independent in the sense that when an individual reduces her savings rate, it will affect the savings rate of individual J, which in turn affect the individual J's neighbors, and so on and so forth. Okay? So it is very important to investigate this consumption complementarity that could be used to explain the relationship between income inequality and savings rate in Canada. For this purpose, I estimated a linear regression model based on equation 4, but then I augmented it with some of the standard economic and other social variables that are significant or could be significant in determining savings rates in provinces or across the country. So my basic regression equation is equation 5, where the savings rate is a function of a constant, the Gini coefficient representing the inequality. This PCIJ is per capita income growth, and DEP is simply the dependency ratio, which is simply the ratio of people under 15 years old plus people over 65 years old divided by people the working age, okay? The dependency ratio. And simply R is the standard real interest rate that we all know determines savings in the economy. What do I expect this coefficient to be? Negative. That's what I'm saying. That's what the data says. That's what status-seeking theory says. So B1 is expected to be negative. B2 is tricky. First, you know that I didn't enter PCIJ contemporaneously. Why? Because of the possible correlation between that and the inequality variable. So I lagged it in the equation, and I tested it before I did that. B2 could be positive or negative, and let me explain. If there is growth in per capita income, and that growth in per capita income is driven mostly by the poor, then it means that that growth in per capita income is also reducing income inequality. And if it does, then it will lead to increase in savings, and that is positive relationship. Again, it is also possible that there will be growth in income, like we saw from the 70s up to now. That is mostly driven by the rich, and meaning that growth in per capita income driven by the rich worsens income inequality, and according to the theory, would lead to a decline in savings. So B2 could be negative or could be positive. And if the theory that I'm talking about is really strong enough in determining the consumption behavior in Canada, I expect strongly that this B2 will be negative in my data. So this will be negative, that will be negative. But like I said, it can be positive. Dependency ratio. Dependency ratio is simply if the economy has a lot of people in the young age group and the old age group, depending on the working people, then there will be some kind of financial stress and there will be less savings. So this is also expected to have a negative effect on savings. However, sometimes it depends on the demographic structure of the economy. There are, or if I'm doing this for the provinces, there are probably some provinces, which I will investigate later, that is other research that I will do after this, where probably most people of retiring age are not retiring, they are still working, and people as young as 13, 14, 15 are working. And for that matter, the dependency ratio may take on this effect and will probably will probably have positive effects on savings, right? Because if the old people are working, the young ones are also working, then many people are earning income and could be saving more. So there is also that possibility of this becoming different from what we expect it to be. This, for sure, is positive in almost every economy, where it's simply the price incentive for savings, and as the real interest rate increases, people want to put away more money. So that is the expectations on my parameters. What am I doing for time?
15 more minutes.
You can't be serious.
Yeah.
Okay. Results. I first pulled all the data for all the provinces and ran this regression. So this is what in econometrics we call the pooled time series data, right? Pooled OLS results. And that is the first one. So these are the variables, as we have already discussed, the R squared. And the OLS, the pooled OLS result. What do we see here? As is expected, the Gini coefficient, the coefficient on the Gini coefficient is negative, indicating the negative relationship between inequality and savings. And also, per capita income growth also has negative coefficient, reinforcing the theory as I discussed earlier on. Dependency ratio takes on negative effect, but not statistically significant in the OLS estimation. And then there, of course, the interest rate, the most significant determinant of savings in the model, and also the most significant in terms of magnitude of parameter, and also significance in terms of the regression analysis. And then, but why did I move away from this, or why did I do these two regressions? Now, those of you here who know econometrics very well, if you pull all the data, right, and run them as one regression here, you fail to account for the panel structure of the data. And you are, so to speak, implicitly imposing some restrictions on the structure of the error terms in your model, okay? Meaning there is no heteroscedasticity and there's no serial correlation. But then, this, as we saw, there were some differences in provinces in terms of the dynamics of savings and income inequalities. So this estimation might not be good and may probably produce some biased estimate, especially on the coefficient that we are so much interested in. So in normal situations, economists try to estimate these models by using a panel data analysis. And two of the most important way of doing it is to either do what is known as the random effect estimation or the fixed effect estimation. And I can go on and give you a very good econometric, of course, I believe will be good, econometric lecture on the relation between the two. But in actual fact, in most cases, the preferred estimation is random effect. Why? Because it's generally known to be efficient. The fixed effect says that there are some specific province effects that must be estimated independently. And as you include those 10 provinces, you are losing efficiency. Because your degrees of freedom, you have so many parameters to be estimated, all right? But here, this estimate tries to say that, okay, there are some provinces significant, but that can be subsumed into the error term. Once again, similar to what the OLS does, right? So there is a test that tries to select between the two. If you're interested in the panel structure of the panel nature of the data, then you need to select between the two. And that is known as the Hausman test. You conduct the Hausman test to choose between the two. And the Hausman test that I conducted rejected the no saying that this is efficient. Of course, consistent and efficient, and this is consistent, but not efficient. The no was rejected in favor of the fixed effect. Hence, the equation that I seem to be selling is the fixed effect equation. And if you look at the estimate for fixed effects and random effect, compare that to the OLS, you see the OLS truly seems to have problem, meaning it has some kind of downward bias. in it, and that gives us confidence that the fixed effects could be capturing the true relationship, and hence a negative relationship between income inequality and savings. The per capita income, as we've seen, that has grown over the period of this study, and this is the period 1979 to 2007, and over that period we saw that income growth accrued more to the poor, rich than the poor, and hence this estimate. But to check for the robustness of my study, I re-estimated everything, this time using a different measure of income inequality, which is known as the Kuznets ratio, the ratio of the top 20% to the ratio of the bottom, or to the bottom 40%. And the result, the direction, and everything is really similar to the first one. In other words, the estimates and the exercise yield very robust results. And our results simply, like I put here, this is a last minute note, the results with respect to the first two variables are consistent with the findings of Yalnizyan 2010 that the richest 1% of Canadians took about a third of all income growth during the past 2 decades. During the past 2 decades. But then, if the fixed effects give very good results, I went ahead to do 2 more tests, and that is to do it province-specific. So I did this estimate for almost all the provinces. I'll be quite fast here. And
you have a little bit more than.
Oh, thank you. And first with the Gini coefficient. And with the Gini coefficient, we saw that about 8 of the provinces yielded the results that we're talking about, with the exception of Nova Scotia, which is not significant, which is a big problem here, and Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan is the only province with a positive relationship with income inequality, and as well as significant. Okay, but 8 of them, and out of the 8, only 7 have significant negative effect. And then when it goes to the per capita income growth, it is also negative, the sign that we are expecting, with the exception of Prince Edward Island. And in most cases, it is significant. In a few cases, it is significant in different provinces. And then the savings, the interest rate is significant for all provinces, with the exception of Alberta, which is strange. We don't respond to interest rates in this province that much. And I also did this using the other measure of income inequality, which is the Kuznets ratio, and the results seem to toe the same lines as the one I discussed earlier, with the exception, again, of Saskatchewan having positive relationship and significant, and Nova Scotia having positive and not significant. And what is BC? BC, Alberta, and Manitoba and Quebec, I think. Ontario and Quebec having a very, very strong negative relationship between income inequalities and the savings rate, and even also in the per capita income growth. So hence, what's the conclusion that we can get here? A, that at the national level, increase in income inequality has a significant negative effect on personal savings rate, and that at the provincial level, the relationship is present for 8 of the 10 provinces. That the result serves as evidence, I mean, that's my claim, very strong claim indeed, as evidence that social behavior such as status seeking may matter in the consumption and savings decisions of Canadians, and that prevailing models of consumption behavior, such as the permanent income hypothesis, the powerhouse of all economic studies and models, and the life cycle hypothesis, ignore other important social determinants of consumption and savings decisions. And then that both the national and provincial results imply that growth in per capita income that worsens income inequality impact negatively on the personal savings rate. And that though the dependency ratio has a significant positive effect on personal savings rate at the national level, there are mixed results at the provincial level. And some provinces have positive and significant, which is Saskatchewan, Prince Edward Island, and New Brunswick, and others have negative and significant effect, which is Alberta, Quebec, and Newfoundland. Overall, the results were robust to different measures of income inequality for our preferred fixed effect model for the national levels, and also the result for the OLS estimate for the provincial result, level. Policy implications, quite well. From policy point of view, this paper has highlighted the relative importance of social behavior in the discussions on the dynamics of income inequality and its impact on overall economic performance. Therefore, policies to address income inequality will not only address an important economic menace that seems to grip many developed countries in the past few decades, but will be providing critical foundation for stronger economic growth through its impact on savings rate. And the policies would also be particularly important in providing significant boost to private savings at the time of failing public savings, as we all know. So Canada could be able to continue to avoid the financial turmoil in Europe and United States that stem primarily from declining national savings. Thank you.